and welcome to this edition of Chocobo Chasers. Today, we are joined by veteran voice actor and animator Joe Whyte. You may recognize Joe as the protagonist Chris Redfield in Resident Evil HD. In addition to starring in arguably the most iconic horror game franchise of all time, Joe's also worked in animation on some huge projects such as Disney's Tarzan, Tangled. So some of our favorites for sure. Joe, it's awesome to have you.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, let's go ahead and let's jump right in. Dash, why don't you start us off, man?
So I noticed you have a podcast called Crimson Head. Great
we do.
name by that.
Yeah, it's it's a very strange thing. My whole relationship to the Resident Evil world community started as a fluke. It really began as something that I did not foresee turning into what it's become. Because when I got the gig for the first remake of Resident Evil 1, there just wasn't a lot of Resident Evil in the world. It hadn't been produced yet, so we did the first one just thinking it was a one-off video game that probably never have anything to do video games, and another one coming out and movies, and it's turned into this juggernaut of a franchise, and I'm just honored and glad to have done one tiny little part of it, that way back all those years ago.
So yeah, it seems like that podcast also focuses on like other survival horrors. So
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. We're kind of into the whole thing. It's Dead Space. I can't think of any of the names of the titles right now.
Silent Hill.
Silent Hill, thank you very much. Resident Evil, just anything that's in that genre is kind of our métier, and where we like to hang out. Lots of dead bodies, lots of stinky dead animals,
So
me of home.
So were you a fan of like these kind of games and anything?
Nope.
So you just fell in love with it because you were a part of it at that
point. Absolutely. I've always kind of been into my whole life I've been into I guess you could say escapism. I've always been a book reader. I've always been a lover of theater and movies and TV shows. Anything that takes me out of my humdrum existence and shows me something bigger, someplace that has how do you put it, non everyday events.
Yeah.
I've just always been a big fan of that. So getting into video gaming was a natural for me. The first game that I got into was back in 1980. I was in the Navy, and we had a mainframe computer on the base, and it had a very early version of Adventure, which was the first text-based game that you could play. You log into this thing, and it would say, you see a mailbox. There's a house to the south, and you could say, N for north, S for south, east for west, or east and east, E for east, and W for west. So you would move, and then it would say, okay, you've moved here. Now you see blah, blah, blah. What do you want to do? Very primitive version of video games. And then the Zork games came out. I don't know if you played any of the Infocom games or the Zork games.
A little bit before my time, for sure.
It's before all your times, I can guarantee it. But if you really want to understand the state of video gaming today, you have to go back and play some of these early adventure games, these early text-based games. There weren't even any graphics. It was like an interactive novel. They formed the foundation for everything that we're doing today. These guys broke the ground. And they're wonderful, and they really are a form of true escapism where your brain is providing the visuals, And if you are a complete psycho like myself, the visuals are pretty good when your brain creates them. I didn't do that much acid in the 70s, but I did my share. I'm just kidding.
Hey, doesn't bother us.
Yeah,
you guys are like, what the hell is this guy talking about?
You can come on the podcast with acid,
Yeah.
man. You're all good. I think that might make for some entertaining stuff.
I would definitely say so. Eric, why don't you go ahead and follow that up, man?
So we've had the fortune of having quite a few voice actors and a couple voice directors on this so far.
Very
You
cool.
have one of the more unique skill sets is that you're also an animator.
Well, let me correct you there. I'm not an actual animator. I'm a modeler.
Modeler, okay.
So I don't make stuff move, but I do create all the assets that go into CG, into games or to films or live action. Now, I'm actually, my current job, I'm working for a company doing what they call pre-visualization stuff for live action films.
Mhm.
The company that I'm working for now is actually a VFX house. It's not an animation house, although they do have a feature animation division that's in London, but I'm working in the previs division here. So I create all the sets, the props, the trees, the cities, the cars, the the characters. That's kind of what I do. Yeah, I do that in 3D.
That's awesome.
How did you transition? Like, how did becoming a voice actor pop up when you've just been modeling for the most part? Or did you voice act first?
No, well, I've been an actor since high school, really. Doing whatever I could do, whatever I could get into. I've done a lot of improv shows, a lot of comedy, a lot of sorry, I tend to go wide afield.
Oh, you're
It's
totally
okay.
fine.
I got into voiceover. Was not something that I ever considered doing, even though I was a theater student and went to Cal State North. I got into voiceover when I started working at Disney because my first job as a modeler was there. I was working as an operations coordinator, which is basically the person at the company that you would call if a light bulb went out in your office. So you would call operations, they would send someone over to fix, or if you needed your cable hooked up or something broke. We were those people. And I was walking around Disney one day and I saw someone modeling using a program called Alias Power Animator. And he was modeling the bell tower from Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I was just fascinated. I kind of have a computer background because I studied computers in the Navy and then have always been into PCs and stuff as they came out over the years. But so I saw this guy modeling and I was fascinated and I asked him about it. And he said, if you're interested, I can get you an account on this machines and you can go through the tutorial books and teach yourself how to model. And I did. It took me about a year and 2-3 months. And I went through the tutorial book and I started to get pretty good at it. And some of the artists at Disney at the time kind of took me under their wings and gave me, there was one gentleman named Dan Chaika there who gave me assignments as though I was working for him. And after about a year and a few months of that, Disney came to me and asked me if I wanted to take a trainee modeler spot on Tarzan. That was the first film that I worked on as an artist. And I've just been modeling ever since. It became my career. And I kind of came to the animation game late. I was 34 when I started working at Disney. Most people start working for the company a lot younger. And have gone to art school and have been artists their whole lives. And so I was very, very lucky to be accepted by them and to be given the opportunity to learn. Basically, my art school was working at Disney Animation, which is pretty good school to go to if you want to learn how to get into animation. But as I was doing that, they do something in animation called scratch dialogue, which is where they have the script and they have their storyboards, and they're working out the timing of a movie, and they're making sure that scenes work and that the characters are working and the dialogue's working. And so what they'll do is they'll take the storyboards and they'll go into, they have their own recording facility at Disney, of course they do. And they record people from around the building, artists, whoever in the building happens to have a knack for doing voiceover. They'll let you go in the booth and record as though you're doing the actual part, as though you're recording the actual character. And they use that scratch, that temporary dialogue, to work out sequences and timing and jokes and to explore different pathways for dialogue. And what happens is, if what you do as a temp voiceover track, if it's good enough, sometimes they'll keep it in the film. So that's how I got, I have 3 voices in Tarzan. I've got voices in Home on the Range. I've got voices in Emperor's New Groove. I have 8 different characters in Emperor's New Groove, because those were all from scratch. Mark and Randy, the director and producer of the film, they were very nice to me. They let me do a lot of scratch for them, and they liked it, so they just kept it in the film. And after doing that for a few years, it's very good practice. Doing scratch dialogue for Disney directors at Disney is the best way to learn how to do voiceover. It's a school that you can't buy. You can't purchase that kind of training. I was in the right place at the right time, and I was very lucky to have learned there. One of the directors I was working for, doing voiceover for, said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this. You should have an agent, and you should try to do this professionally." I already had my SAG card. I was already a member of SAG from doing some on-camera stuff. I used to do commercials and other, like I was on General Hospital for one show, and so I was able to just start doing professional voiceover gigs through up with. And that's kind of how I got into it. Now, the Resident Evil thing, I didn't actually audition for. My wife was working at Sound Deluxe at the time in Hollywood. Sound Deluxe was the recording facility that they were doing all the recording and all the sound effects and all that stuff for Resident Evil. And I happened to be visiting her one day, and the casting person, Carol Rougier, was there, and they were looking for someone to voice match the first guy that did the voiceover for the first game, the very first sort of low-res version of Resident Evil. I forget his name. I know Charlie Kraslovsky did the live-action reference for the first game. And in fact, I'm going to meet Charlie on the set of a film that I will not give you any information about.
I love NDAs.
we may be doing something together. You didn't hear it from me. Yes, you did, because here we are, and you have the.
Keep wearing your hat if it's Resident Evil related.
Right, exactly. I just want to whet your appetites. I don't want to give you any actual information. But anyway, so Carol was there, and they were looking for someone to voice match the first guy.
Right.
So Carol said, "Hey, you're an actor. You do some voiceover stuff." I said, "Yeah, I've been learning how to do that at Disney." And she said, "Do you want to try to voice match this guy? We'll play some samples for you and see if you can sound like him for this video game called Resident Evil that we're doing." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, okay." So I stepped in the booth, and they played some of the playback for me, and I was able to voice match him pretty well. And they offered me the part of Chris Redfield.
That's awesome.
And so after we started doing we didn't do it right there, but a few days later we did the gig, and we ended up doing, I think, to complete the game, I think we did 4 or 5 4-hour sessions. And when you're doing voiceover, a 4-hour session is generally the maximum that they will have you do to try and preserve your voice. They don't want you to talk for too long, because you'll go mute. So I think it took 4 or 5 sessions to cover all the dialogue from the game, and then I think we did one pickup recording session where we did all the like the hits, like you have to do
like
a
getting
full
her
range
sounds
of,
and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, all the being bitten by a giant snake sounds, all those, and being thrown around by Plant 42. And that was an interesting piece of dialogue because the animation was already done for it. So they had a Chris Redfield being thrown around the room by Plant 42. So I basically had to watch the video and try to time the sounds to him being thrown from side to side in the room. It was very interesting.
That's
I
awesome.
highly recommend it. It's very cathartic if you ever have a chance to try that out.
So you worked actually on, just like you mentioned, a few Disney projects. So this is not necessarily going into projects maybe that you've worked on, but what's your all-time favorite Disney project? And just that you're a fan of?
Well, I've been asked that before, and it's a very difficult question to answer because every movie that I worked on there was special in some way. Of course, Tarzan, the first film that I worked on, the crew was so amazing, and the people were just so wonderful. In fact, I had one of my leads, one of the guys that was my direct supervisor on Tarzan, said, "Don't get used to this because it's not always this good." So we had a very good experience on Tarzan. That being said, Treasure Planet was an amazing film to work on. I was given a lot of opportunities to do really hero size props. The ship that they fly around on through space is my model. So in that regard, it was just I was I was a young modeler. I was only on my second movie, and I got to do all this incredible stuff. It was just a great experience. And then every film I worked on from there on was just something special in every way. Tangled was a fantastic experience. That was the last film that I worked on there. Before they kind of had I was there I was in the building for 16 years, and then they had a purge. It happens there once in a while. They go through these change of guard things where they lay off a group of people, and unfortunately, it was just my time, and so I moved on from there. But everything I worked on at Disney was special in one way or another. It's changed a lot since then. It's from what I understand, I mean, I still have people who are still working there who are like family to me. It's become a much more corporate environment. Back in the mid 90s when I started, it was still kind of had that old school feeling to it, because a lot of the artists that were there at the time were 2D artists. CG really hadn't even become a thing yet. So it was really kind of old school, and there was such a wonderful vibe in the building, and it just, I'm not going to blame it on CG, but things really changed in the building. The whole attitude of the place changed when they changed over from doing 2D films to 3D films. And it really was
very
kind
interesting.
of the end of not just the end of an artistic era, but the end of the whole zeitgeist of the place just changed. It was not what it was.
Yeah. Dash, why don't you go ahead and follow that up, man?
All right. So was there any particular reason why you wouldn't or you didn't return as Chris for any future projects? We did speak with Peter Jessup, who did Albert Wesker, and he alluded, basically they didn't want union workers, so they went non-union for
yeah. There's a very specific reason that I didn't come back for Resident Evil, any of the future games. They didn't ask me. I would have come back. Of course I would have come back. I don't know what their reasoning is. I know one of the things was, they didn't want to use union people. They didn't want to pay for that. I think that they're less afraid of that now because the games have become so huge. At first it was probably a budgetary thing. Now I think they've got whatever budget they want because the Resident Evil franchise is so massive.
Yeah.
But yeah, simple as that. I mean, I would go back and be a part of whatever they wanted me to be a part of again, in a heartbeat. If they just called up and asked, they know where to find me.
Yeah. It seems like Chris himself is a very volatile role because it's changed
It's changed
hands
so many
times.
times.
That's the thing. And really, Chris now is not the Chris that I imagined him to be. I have always imagined him as much more of an everyman, normal guy, not a superhero, just a guy thrown into an extremely crazy situation.
Right.
I've talked about this before on other podcasts. I don't find it interesting to follow a superhero through a dangerous situation because they're going to win. I would much rather follow an average guy who is scared shitless and doesn't know what he's going to do from moment to moment. That flying by the seat of your pants kind of excitement, I find much more interesting than someone who punches boulders. And you know what I'm talking about.
Well, and it's funny that you say that because Resident Evil 7 and Village, you follow Ethan Winters as opposed to, kind of that original crew. And Ethan is basically exactly what you're describing. He's an everyman.
Yeah.
He's just a guy and gets put through like the worst set of circumstances any person has ever been through in their entire life.
Yeah, it's kind of like the whole. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I still flinch every time I reach for that elevator. And the blade comes in and cuts your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like the whole evolution of Resident Evil, like what we got with like Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. It was more action oriented because you're playing as these people who've been through this multiple times already by this point. Right. So you can't make it feel like they're scared shitless. Well, they probably are. But...
There's nothing new about the whole zombie thing, at that point. And it's, there's a battle between the people who created Chris Redfield to have an idea for him, and they see him as this cigarette smoking kind of tough guy, character with the collar pulled up and the whole, it's just I never felt that was who he was, but
I felt like we were kind of getting him back when we had him in Resident Evil 7, and then they buffed him back up in Resident Evil 8, probably because people are like, this isn't my Chris. I'm like, but he kind of looks more like Resident Evil 1 Chris now.
Yeah. They don't Capcom doesn't call me for
creative liberties,
creative input on those things. Unfortunately.
Eric, why don't you go ahead and follow up with our final question here, actually?
So one of my questions was actually going to be if you planned on moving into modeling for video games, but you kind of answered that vaguely earlier in the podcast. Can you maybe go in a little bit more in depth on that, or is that some projects you're working on that are kind of under wraps right now?
The thing I'm working on currently is under wraps. I can't even tell you what the movie's about, but I'll tell you this: it'll be funny. It's a funny movie. It's got some very funny people in it. I would love. I just turned 62 this year.
Oh, congratulations!
So I'm kind of getting up there, and I'm looking forward to retiring in 5 years, hopefully. But one of my dream jobs would be to work on the next Last of Us, because I love that franchise so much, and they do the most incredible work over there at Naughty Dog. I would love to work for them, just doing and building environments for the game. I don't really plan on getting into video games as a modeler from here on out. I'm going to try to kind of do what I'm doing until I can stop doing that. Once I get off the sort of the hamster wheel of the modeling thing, I plan on focusing more on voiceover, doing more in that world. I mean, I still audition quite a bit. I've only done one gig this year so far, and that was an ADR gig. ADR means automatic dialogue replacement. So sometimes you'll be watching a movie and you'll think that someone is talking, but it's actually another actor who's dubbed their voice over what they're saying. So I did a little ADR for a film called Harold and the Purple Crayon, which I think is coming out this year, sometime later this summer or early fall, where I just went in and replaced dialogue for an old guy in a park being hassled by these kids. But I want to get more into that. You know, what's nice about getting older is my voice is moving into a range where I can play some really interesting characters, older wizard type players, the sort of almost a Patrick Stewart kind of character, so that I can start to move into and start to do those types of roles. Looking forward to that. So yeah, that's kind of where my career's headed. You know, I'll model until I can't get hired to model anymore, and then
straight to the voiceover.
try to do more voiceover.
That's awesome.
I don't really go out for on-camera auditions much anymore, mostly because it's a lot of work and a lot of expense and a lot of driving around, and less driving around these days because most auditions that you do will be from home on like Zoom. A lot of casting people are just doing self-tapes now.
Wow.
So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Oh, that's amazing.
That's great. Yeah, perfect answer. Thank you so much.
Well, Joe, I think I speak for all of us. This was awesome. Getting to hear your experience. Obviously Resident Evil, we are huge fans of the series, and we're insanely excited to kind of see what you do next. Wanted to give you a second. Is there any project or anything you want to plug? Like Dash mentioned earlier in the show, I know that you host the Crimson Head podcast. So if you wanted to go ahead and plug that in, that's
the Crimson Head podcast. Yeah, we're and well, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me on. It's a joy and a privilege to be asked to come out and talk to people. It always amazes me that anybody wants to hear what I have to say anyway. But Crimson Head podcast. Yes, Crimson Head Elder podcast. We've got some great stuff coming up. One of the things we're going to be doing is hosting a good friend of mine, a woman named Dawn Fintor, is a Foley artist. She does sound effects she's done sound effects on hundreds of films that you've seen. You've definitely heard her work. If you've seen a movie in the past 20 years, you've heard a lot of Dawn's work. She did the Foley for Last of Us 2.
Oh, wow.
And so we're going to have her on to talk about her work as a Foley person and what she does in films. That's coming up relatively soon. We've got we just did a thing where we had all of the cast members from Crimson Head, from Resident Evil, from my game, all of the actors except for one who, there was one actor who just wasn't interested in coming on the podcast, but we had the entire crew there. We did that. So that's on the archives. You can go see that. We've got some signings coming up. All of the Resident Evil people from my game, except for that one guy. I won't mention his name. Are going to be doing some live signings. We've got some coming up in Bakersfield, I think. And then there's another place out in Riverside in California. And then there are some cons coming up this year. We have an agent who's getting us into some conventions. So the whole cast will be going out and doing that, which I think will be kind of fun. We've got I've got a Streamily page, so you can get autographs and photos and stuff from the Streamily page. If you just go to streamily.com and look, search my name, you'll find it. And I'll do live signings as well, one-on-one videos with people. What else? What else is going on? That's about it.
All right. Well, we'll also be sure to go ahead and link your socials so that it'll be easy for everybody to go ahead and find, and definitely be sure to link the Crimson Head show as well so that everybody can go ahead and catch up on those episodes. I know I'm going to be listening. That sounds like a lot of fun. Well, Joe, again, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. This has been absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
And
Group hug, bring it in.
Here we go.
And I think with that, we'll go ahead and we'll close the interview out. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
See you next time.